Hmm. So, namaste, and we continue this evening by entering into the 28th chapter in the second part of the Life Divine. It's a fairly long chapter, and so we'll take our time going through it and probably divide it into 3 or maybe even 4 parts. We note in the beginning that all the citations are drawn from the Rig Veda at the opening of the chapter. This last one, Sri Aurobindo, has gone back to the beginning of the Indian spiritual tradition. They're from various books in the Vedas, some of the earliest materials and then some of the latest materials. He sets the stage, picking up his argument from before, where he was discussing the nature of the Gnostic being, by establishing that our evolution as conscious beings occurs in the material universe, but if it is just an outthrowing from a material basis and there is nothing more, then it would have no real significance. It has meaning, this manifestation of the universe and us in it, if there is a self-existing reality behind, in Sanskrit, Swayambhu, arising from one's own nature, that manifests from the beginning to the end, from the highest heights to the deepest depths, as an indivisible reality, an endless being who manifests as an unbounded becoming. Consciousness and life are the key words of importance here. And in us, mind is imperfectly conscious, and life unhappily visited by disaster and seeming end. But that there is life is the first miracle, that out of what seems to be a material covering, that some power of dynamism would emerge and force into being, into becoming, multiple forms of living creatures in material shape is something that is astounding all by itself. As Sri Aurobindo observed someplace, not here in the Life Divine, but I think, but that a single ant is a more stupendous manifestation than the greatest of stars, because something has appeared there that did not exist before. Something has come to the front, which is what manifestation means, stepped clearly to the front. So if the mind, like life, is yet another miracle, an awakening from brute sensification to speak untowardly towards our animal and vegetal friends and brothers and sisters, it becomes aware of itself, or struggles to become aware of itself in some means, through some manner, and it reveals a goal. There is intent here that we would become aware of self and of objects. Consciousness means to be aware first of one's own being, even if our consciousness is limited and restricted to become aware of ourselves first, to take notice of objects, and to build the powers of self-awareness into something greater and greater until one reaches all awareness. And this means that as we develop and grow our consciousness, not simply around us, not simply inside us, but below us and above us as well, sort of in a spherical enlargement encompassing all planes of being, we are reminded, we are rediscovering a superconscience which is hidden in inconscience. We look at matter and we see there that there is something deeper, something hidden. As when Teilhard de Chardin, speaking of his own experience, told a young girl that when he looked at a stone, it gleamed, it glistened in gold. There was something in it that you couldn't see on the surface. And so a penetrating vision finds that secret, finds that in the depth of darkness, there is a great light. And that superconscience is released, revealed in the evolution of this whole hidden chain. Not only are there empowerments, restricted expressions of this limitless conscious being in plane after plane, but within each plane, there are limitless formations. Infinite numbers of beings populate each plane, all the way down into the inconscient, which seems to be murky and incapable of redress. But there we go. We do find a way to grow out of it and to begin to discover what's at its roots, this superconscience, which sleeps there or seemingly sleeps there. So in this whole hidden chain, we find meaningful steps of evolution traced out as being rediscovers itself in becoming. It grows from step to greater step, all the way back up the chain. And gnosis represents this. Gnosis is this self-aware and all-aware intelligence. It is self-realization, to put it in a simple statement. It is knowing what is the nature of the self, the Atman, Brahman. But it's more than that. It is also something that, as a power of knowledge, also has a power of action. It has a principle of delight underlying it. So just as the emergence of life indicates an ultimate aim going beyond, and like mine, it's not the highest power of being. So as we experience what is the real self, we begin to look for the lever that allows the spirit to manifest, to attain its perfection. And it calls us up and up and up into what Sri Aurobindo calls the supramental consciousness. The Gnostic, the supramental power are essentially the same thing. It reaches the supramental level when knowledge is equal with power. We can know, as Sri Aurobindo has indicated in the last chapter, we can have the beginnings of a Gnostic existence, begin to shape a Gnostic being as soon as we arrive at the highest levels of mind. So, higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, overmind. All these levels increase in grade and aspects of power and deepening knowledge as we rise above But all the walls are down when we reach the supramental. So that is the goal, to express what is innately divine in the material form, to establish a Gnostic life means first getting all prepared. We have to be aware of the self, not simply to grasp what is the psychic being within, what is the truth of our own nature, but to be able to live more largely, to live in the universal, to recognize the same self in all beings, to never be absent of the sustaining principle of delight, to always have an unerring sense of what is the right thing to do in the moment, not an ethical right, but a response to the indwelling spirit that says this and now. Kartavyam karma, the work to be done. To go back to what we say of the Gita in its tradition. So, this emergence of the true self within us and the ennobling of the nature so that it can express more powerfully the truth of its vision in active energy and in reshaped form. That demands, in a sense, a luminous remolding of the entire instrumental nature. First in the individual, and then in the collective life. A collective life which would assemble not only aspirants, but other realized beings into meaningful cohesion. So a Gnostic society or something of that order has yet to be attained. But this is a necessary goal as human life transcends itself and reaches for the divine life. Yes, the spiritual person can live inside in the radiance of that Atman, that Brahman, and in a sense, let the light shine forth from that. It'll have some impact, but a limited power of perfection in the environment around and in other people. So the spiritual realization, while it's the bedrock, while it's the foundation from which we begin, is not sufficient to establish a Gnostic life or to found a Gnostic collectivity. The perfection is limited in scope. The Gnostic change brings a new order of being, introduces higher powers and instruments of world action to transform the values. So as we step towards this Gnostic nature, we have the liberated being no longer living confined in the ego, not restricted to identity with a particular form or extent of lifespan, but we live in the infinite and we live in eternity, and having new powers that are born from above, not from below, struggling upwards from an inchoate manifestation that began the cosmos, we can create ourselves anew. We can create a new world. this is why it is essential to make this transition, not to void the possibility by spending our energy overmuch in trying to sattvasize and rework the old forms and simply buff them to a bright shine. They cannot be transformed by being buffed. They can only be transformed by going inside and bringing forth inner powers to bring down from above supreme powers. And so our real work, again, is this foundation inside. Find the nature of the soul. Live in the spiritual vastness around. Find that which transcends all, because that is our absolute foundation. When we recover that, new possibilities emerge for us. Hmm. So there's an evolutionary demand pressing us, a sort of nisus to disclose the true being within and structure a better vehicle and a more fitting world that expresses the harmony of the great self. And perhaps we could read from a section or two. I think I'll turn to page 1058 in the collected works of Sri Aurobindo uh, version. I'll read from the middle of page 1058. This inner life once created to convert our whole surface being, our thought, feeling, action in the world, into a perfect power of that inner life, must be our other preoccupation. Only if we live in that deeper and greater way in our dynamic parts can there be a force for creating a greater life or the world be remade, whether in some power or perfection of mind and life, or the power and perfection of the spirit. Skipping down, for soul and mind and life are powers of being and can grow, but cannot be cut out or made. An outer process or formation can assist or can express soul and mind and life, but cannot create or develop it. One can indeed help the being to grow, not by an attempt at manufacture, but by throwing on it stimulating influences or by lending to it one's forces of soul or mind or life. But even so, the growth must still come from within it, determining from there what shall be made of these influences and forces, and not from outside. And if we looked at the next page, 1059, towards the bottom, it reads, to become ourselves is the one thing to be done. But the true ourself is that which is within us. And to exceed our outer self of body, life, and mind is the condition for this highest being, which is our true and divine being, to become self-revealed and active. It is only by growing within and living within that we can find it. Once that is done, to create from there the spiritual or divine mind, life, body, and through this instrumentation, to arrive at the creation of a world which shall be the true environment of a divine living. This is the final object that force of nature has set before us. This then is the first necessity. that the individual, each individual, shall discover the spirit, the divine reality within him, and express that in all his being and living. A divine life must be first and foremost an inner life. For since the outward must be the expression of what is within, there can be no divinity in the outer existence if there is not the divinization of the inner being. The divinity in man dwells veiled in his spiritual center. There can be no such thing as self-exceeding for man or a higher issue for his existence if there is not in him the reality of an of an eternal self and spirit. Well, so a whole and integral awareness of self is the first necessity if one aspires to establish upon earth a divine life, a Gnostic collectivity. So the consciousness of the realized self wields force. There's a power of self there that signifies divinity. Bottomless delight, same thing. Triune, existence, consciousness, bliss. That's what one realizes when one reaches the apex of this ascending stairway. But apart from realizing this for ourselves individually, we have to know universally as well. Beyond, obviously, the constriction of the ego, we have to come to the all in all, to be able to vibrate to that same self, manifesting according to the evolving nature of the other in front of us. The other is no other but an other of the same self. There is only one being. And we have to be able to step beyond individuality and universality, beyond being as wide as the cosmos, and transcend it. This transcendence exceeds all forms, all facets, all measures, all manifestation. The individual and the universe are, in a sense, contingent or incomplete forms of the transcendence. They express it, they do not exhaust it. So there is a sovereignty that comes with this kind of realization, which settles in to the being. So we move from finding the self and living from that to exceeding the self. We, again, universalize or transcend. There is, as Sri Aurobindo describes, a transference of the center of our being and action from outside in the instruments, mind, life, body. We live a mental life primarily. We live a vital life primarily. We can't escape the physical life primarily. But we transcend that. We transfer the rulership of our nature to inside. We live within first. And we scale the heights, go up to the supreme pinnacles so far as we can reach, because one attained, another presents itself. The scale is beyond our capacity to grasp. But it is a difficult journey. And when we begin to look inside to find this self, and Sri Aurobindo here is expressing what it means to delve into our being, in a sense, yogically, psychologically, to find out what is the truth of our nature. Some people meet first a darkness and quit there. Bertrand Russell did that. He said, when I look inside, I see only darkness, so I will stay outside. Thank you very much. And so he did to the end of his days. For Sri Aurobindo, you get used to the darkness, and then you see a brighter light behind. So we can, by perseverance, by practice, by concentration, purification, all the yogic tools, enter into a silence and arrive at a greater existence and step from that towards universality. You can see that he's recapitulating the steps of the yoga here, what an integral yoga would look like in a brief compass. So there is foundationally a realization of spiritual unity, one being, one hyphen being, which founds an active divine life. This is not merely an ecstatic, abstract awareness where you see it and feel it, but you can't do anything with it. This is an empowering liberation into infinite being. One learns how to act more purely, more forcefully, as the being becomes ready to be the channel of that force. It will not arrive prematurely. It prepares its arrival. It announces that it's coming. Things are put in order, and then comes the auspicious new chapter, a wealth of energies, a new vision, and always a greatening delight. So we could read again, I think, profitably. This one would carry us to page 1066. And yes, I know the meaning of the date. This is from near the top, a reminder of us in our collective aspirations. An external unity with others must always be an outward joining and association of external lives with a minor inner result. The mind and heart attach their movements to this common life and the beings whom we meet there. But the common external life remains the foundation. The inward constructed unity, or so much of it as can persist in spite of mutual ignorance and discordant egoisms, conflict of minds, conflict of hearts, conflict of vital temperaments, conflict of interests, is a partial and insecure superstructure. The spiritual consciousness, the spiritual life reverses this principle of building. It bases its action in the collective life upon an inner experience and inclusion of others in our own being, an inner sense and reality of oneness. The spiritual individual acts out of that sense of oneness, which gives him immediate and direct perception of the demand of self on other self, the need of the life, the good, the work of love and sympathy that can truly be done. A realization of spiritual unity, a dynamization of the intimate consciousness of one being, of oneself and all beings, can alone found and govern by its truth the action of the divine life. In the Gnostic or divine being, in the Gnostic life, there will be a close and complete consciousness of the self of others, a consciousness of their mind, life, physical being, which are felt as if they were one's own. The Gnostic being will act not out of a surface sentiment of love and sympathy or any similar feeling, but out of this close mutual consciousness, this intimate oneness. So you can see that what he's describing here is not a state of aspiration. not a state of, oh, I admire this thought. Isn't that nice? I'll try that. But of actual realization of having founded in oneself this spiritual integer, this one being, which insists upon uniting all in its consciousness. That is the foundation of a Gnostic life, not a pamphlet, not uh, a mutually agreed set of discussion points, no template. This is born from realization. And in describing this, Sri Aurobindo is describing himself. He has achieved these states of consciousness. He has this all-embracing oneness in his vision. And so is waiting for his companions to join him. This, again, written 1940 or so, is a clarion call to all who hear his message to undertake the real work, which is not to read the book, but to realize the spirit. So, individual realization and individual perfection is the first desideratum. The second is complete universality and oneness. The third, proceeding from that, is the perfected collective life of Gnostic individuals who dwell beyond the collective ego, let alone the individual ego, and beyond the ideal of practical sharing. We could pause for a moment and recognize that to get a collection of self-realized beings in one place is difficult. And merely having people living a collective life, as we had so many examples back in the 1970s, yielded thin results. But that there are realized beings who feel and sense the reality of the other's state of consciousness is another truth. And that they can work beyond the reach of an ordinance, that they can work outside of a religious framework or even a set down path, this is how you do this yoga, who simply recognize the truth of the self in another, active, present. This is something that is also true. Now, can they work together at a single point in a single community, so-called? They can. Can they work together physically apart, miles and miles stretching away? Yes, they can. What signifies this is the inner awareness. Their action will take significant form. And we speak of these beings all being present in the here and now, but this is a family of uplifted individuals who form a spiritual family or one cell in a large number of spiritual families, each connected to the other, facets of diamonds, in a sense, glittering for all spiritually awakened people to see. In this time, in future time, and in past time. The universe is one, you know. Being is real, and the experience of death does not rub out the individual. The form is gone. There is no question. But the real entity persists. And so, what is the borderland? Where is the transition line for one who lives in a Gnostic consciousness? There is no gulf of being. So, there is a single self, evolving forms of unified knowledge progressively, which motivates from inside a reordering of cosmos on the basis of oneness. As we evolve, oneness becomes more and more promising and more present, despite the obvious turns of the snaky path of evolution in cosmic time. Don't be distracted. Spiritual forces which we receive inwardly are expressed with a harmonic purpose. We grow into personal liberation and into a free diversity which is not chaotic, but which to the temporizing and well-structured mind may seem disordered, incomprehensible. But the spirit knows what it's doing. The Yoga Shakti knows its path. So there is a common truth expressed in many forms. The realization of the one working in all is that from which we begin, imparted to us lights, radiances, powers from a supernature. And in this receptive Gnostic being, there is the capacity for leadership, subordination, for every possibility, according to what is auspicious at the moment. Sometimes one leads, sometimes one serves. Hierarchy and equality have equal reign in the liberated being. It is often mistaken that if someone realizes the Atman, everything is flat equal across the board. Well, there is that essential equality in all beings, from the one-celled creature to the particle of sand, all the way up to and beyond the gods. Yes, but there is also an evolved hierarchy and a certain responsibility that comes with growth, not egoistic swagger that I have earned this spot and I will rule you all with an iron fist, that sort of thing that belongs to petulant children. But this idea that with growth comes responsibility, but it's a concordant responsibility. It's not a weight. One does it and increases the harmony of all experiences. So, unity is the basis of this one being, is it not? Unity. Mutuality is naturally the result of oneness and diversity balanced. And harmony is the inevitable power enforcing beauty and truth. I would say that we've reached roughly page 1070 in the chapter to this point, and I think it's a good place to stop. We're almost 45 minutes into our evening together, evening here, morning some places. So, with your permission, I'll read only a few lines from Savitri this evening. And these from Book Two, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Canto 15, The Kingdoms of the Greater Knowledge. And we're continuing from page 298. A glorious multiple of one radiant self, answering to joy with joy, to love with love. All there were moving mansions of God bliss. Eternal and unique, they lived the one. Their forces are great outbursts of God's truth, and objects are its pure spiritual shapes. Spirit no more is hid from its own view. All sentience is a sea of happiness, and all creation is an act of light. Out of the neutral silence of his soul, he passed to its fields of puissance and of calm, and saw the powers that stand above the world, traversed the realms of the supreme idea, and sought the summit of created things and the almighty source of cosmic change. There knowledge called him to her mystic peaks, where thought is held in a vast internal sense, and feeling swims across a sea of peace, and vision climbs beyond the reach of time. An equal of the first creator seers, accompanied by an all-revealing light, he moved through regions of transcendent truth, inward, immense, innumerably one. Hmm. So, namaste. I hope you're all well. You look well from what I can see. Be so, be bright, be delighted, and carry that delight in a sharing manner to all whom you meet. Much love to you all. Namaste. Jai Ma. Hmm.